Just turn something off. Sorry. How do I? Yeah. Can you, yeah. Sorry about that.
There we go. The mute button. I think that's the new tool for us all in the age of Zoom, figuring out where the mute button is on and off. And so another reason I'm pleased to introduce the session today is I just got off a call this afternoon with 75 providers of long-term care across North America. And what's really interesting is that we all share, and we are all sharing, the same challenges of the COVID era. I think the question a couple of years from now will be, where did you spend COVID? And all of us have played our part in getting through this pandemic, whether we're inside the system or outside. And I would just say that we have learned a lot from COVID in terms of how to manage all aspects of seniors care. But for us, as it were in the administration of the business, we see it, or I see it, as an opportunity for us to take advantage of the opportunities that the additional funding, the additional government attention, and the additional public attention our sector has had through the COVID pandemic. So whilst there's been a lot of tragedy and a lot of difficulty, there is a light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccines, with the fact that the pandemic, particularly in British Columbia and Canada perhaps generally, is starting to show signs of improvement. There is an opportunity for us to take the knowledge that you're talking about today and drive a better agenda with government and with society in general for improved seniors care across the care continuum, whether it be in facilities or in the community. So that's my hope for the next 6 to 9 months, that we will be entering a period of renaissance because the governments across the country are paying attention to our sector. In terms of the vaccines in particular, I think the story with the vaccines right now is good and confused. Good in that we have the vaccine across the province of British Columbia. We're increasingly vaccinating our vulnerable seniors population in long-term care. In Vancouver, we pretty much have almost 90% of our residents in long-term care vaccinated, and I think that's being replicated across the province. However, I was asked to comment on when the vaccine might be available to people outside of long-term care, to seniors generally, and I think the answer is we don't know. You will have seen the news today that supplies are delayed coming into the province of BC and across Canada, and so we're not really sure when those vaccines are going to be available. Right now, the big question is, do we have enough for people's second dose? And we'll be finding that out in the coming days. So really all I can say is it's a good news, bad news. The vaccine is here. It's being widely distributed as best we can based on the priorities that the public health leaders are giving us. But in terms of it being more widely available, not so sure. So all I would close in saying is thank you very much indeed to the Alzheimer's Society of BC for partnering with Providence in this session. I'm going to try and stay on as long as I can, but I do have to be on another COVID outbreak call very shortly. But I'd say that please take advantage of the session, ask your questions. I think you're going to hear from Dr. Penny McCourt very shortly, somebody that I've worked with in the past and an expert in this field. And again, thank you very much indeed for attending. Please come again, and we'll look forward to working with you in the coming months. So I think it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Barbara Lindsay, Interim CEO of the Alzheimer's Society. Welcome, Barbara.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Mary Lou, and thanks so much, Mark. It's lovely to see you in this new role. It's great for Providence Health to have your support. Yeah, so on behalf of the Alzheimer's Society of BC, I want to thank Providence Health for hosting this great set of seminars and providing opportunities for us to see and hear from researchers like Penny and Liz today. You know, there are about 70,000 people in British Columbia who have a diagnosis of dementia, and that number is going to just continue to grow. At the Alzheimer's Society, our vision is a world without Alzheimer's and other dementias, and that world begins with a province where people affected by dementia are acknowledged, supported, and included. So that's a truly dementia-friendly British Columbia. But to make that a reality, we want to make change in a number of ways. We want to change the conversation about dementia. Right now, it's hard. It still feels the stigma of dementia still is a painful one for many people. And we can change that by speaking about dementia in moments like this, and talking about what it feels like, and ensuring that people with dementia are still part of our community. We want to change the experience as well, so supporting families who are on the journey with dementia so that they have the confidence and skills to live the best way possible. And we want to change the practice so that healthcare providers, as well as the community that serve and support people with dementia, feel the confidence and skills to support people with dementia and their families to be included in their work. And we want to change the policy. So we want to amplify the voices of people living with dementia, so those advocates, and strengthen those voices, and to foster our relationships with government as a partner. And we want to change the future of the disease through dementia research. And here's an opportunity today for us to get involved in research by hearing from our speakers today. So we want to thank the Wavefront Center for Communication Accessibility for helping us make this event more accessible. And we have support today from Jenny and Julie. Thanks, Julie. I'd like to bring your attention to the captions. I think we heard a little bit about that from Christine earlier, that the captions in the black box at the top of your screen will be shown throughout the presentation. And we hope that this service will assist individuals who have hearing impairment or who have visual impairment. And we'd really like to get your feedback later to see how that worked out. And so today our captioning is made possible through the Government of Canada's Emergency Community Support Fund for COVID relief projects. Thanks, Kim, for doing this work today. So now I'm going to introduce you to our next speaker, and that's Penny McCourt, Dr. Penny McCourt. So Dr. McCourt has a social work background, and she's worked with older adults in the community, in long-term care, in acute care settings for many years as a clinical social worker. She has a bachelor's and a master's degree from social work from the University of Manitoba, and she has a PhD in interdisciplinary studies from UVic. Her doctoral and postdoctoral studies have focused on aging and mental health and service delivery. She is a founding member of the BC Psychogeriatric Association, and she was appointed to the Seniors Advisory Committee to the Mental Health Commission of Canada. She received a Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal in recognition of her contribution in Canada for her work with caregivers. Through practice, through research, policy and advocacy, and collaboration with others, her goal is to facilitate social environments and that support older people in their mental health. Today, Dr. McCourt is presenting on supporting seniors' well-being. Now afterwards, as Christine mentioned, we will have a brief question and answer. So if you have a question, please press the raise your hand button, and you practice that with Christine, or leave a question in the chat box. So right now, I'd like to welcome Dr. Penny McCourt.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, Christine.
Okay. Apologies for the technology. I don't have the equipment to show my face, but I believe they do have a very nice picture of me. So thank you so much for having me here today. I appreciate the topic, supporting seniors' well-being. And we're going to talk today about in the community as well as in long-term care, which is where I'm quite involved at the moment. So we're going to begin with what social isolation is, and then talk about some community projects that under the auspices of New Horizons that were carried out across the country that facilitate social inclusion, and then talk about social inclusion, social isolation, and COVID, and finally about the project I'm working on today, which is action to reform residential care. And this one is, when we get there, we'll be talking about COVID, social isolation, and long-term care. Okay, could I have the next slide, please? So the formal definition of social isolation really is that we have fewer relationships than we need to feel connected. You can have a lot of relationships, but if they don't make you feel connected and they're not rewarding, that's not enough. Less contact than others than we need. For example, it may not be a deep relationship, but the fact that in my own community I go to stores where I recognize people is a positive thing for me. Contacts and relationships that are mutually satisfying, because you can have toxic relationships or relationships that you just tolerate. That's not going to contribute to feeling good. It is a subjective thing though. Some people are loners, some people prefer to be by themselves. I don't think anybody wants solitary confinement, but it is a question of whether you're more or less extroverted, what kind of coping strategies do you usually use, and how many people you need for that. Various things like that, and it changes over time as well. The sense of whether that loneliness that you sometimes experience turns into social isolation. It can happen to anybody, and it changes over the life course as circumstances change in our lives. The kind of things that put us at risk formally are things like living alone, being age 80 or older, having no children, or little contact with family. Sometimes that's for geographic reasons. Right now it's to do with COVID. If you're living with a low income, that reduces the resources available to you. Having poor health or multiple health, chronic health problems, that can reduce energy and limit your access to resources again, or opportunities. And then critical life transitions like retirement, death of a spouse, losing your driver's license, all those things can happen to any one of us today. Some of those things we can't change, and some of those things we can. But as we age, it's a diminished social network usually happens because of the losses and various other things. And also caregiving is a significant factor as well. Can I have next slide, please? Yeah. Why does it matter? And this is why there's been a lot of money put in at the federal level over the past number of years, looking at social isolation and ways to reduce it through social inclusion. And the reason for this is because seniors are huge in terms of the volunteer sector and in the paid economy. And certainly right now during COVID, lots of people that would volunteer aren't volunteering, and that's going to become quite apparent to agencies. Communities suffer from a lack of social unity, and there's higher social costs when you don't have social unity. They knit the communities together, especially in rural areas. There are areas where there's high proportions of seniors. The loss of experience and wisdom and history that seniors bring to our families and our communities also is lost when you have people who are socially isolated and not able to participate. And on an individual level, there's significant health impacts as a result of being socially isolated. There's an increased chance of premature death, poor general health, more disability from chronic diseases, caregiver burden, a reduced sense of well-being, more depression, reduced quality of life, poor emotional and mental health. Those are all the personal consequences of social isolation. Next slide, please. Could I have the next slide? Next slide. I hope you can still hear me. Okay, many factors are beyond the individual control in terms of social isolation, and this has been recognized by different levels of government, that some things are actually going to take social, economic, or political change and a multifactorial approach in order to address social isolation and increase social inclusion. That was the purpose of having the New Horizons Pan-Canadian projects, of which there were 13 over a 3-year period in Canada. It takes a multifactorial approach and involves many strategies and organizations to address social isolation at the community and the system level, even at the individual level. So one of the things I will talk about are some of the projects that were implemented during these Pan-Canadian projects that are still ongoing. Some of them are and some of them aren't. But just thinking about the multifactorial aspect of things and how so many aspects of what might socially isolate a person are beyond their individual control. Just think about transportation. You know, if there isn't adequate transportation, suitable transportation for your particular needs, which could take into account disability, but could also take into account location. You know, that where you are geographically located, the availability of a bus, for example, in a rural area, or even in an area like Nanaimo, where I live, where you have to walk a long way to get to a bus stop from many parts of town. That means you're not going to be able to get out to things, particularly if you've lost your driver's license or the person who drove you if you weren't the driver. You know, those kinds of things are systems issues that need to be addressed. They're not all personal. Things like, in terms of getting around as well, and people have talked a lot about this, is bathrooms, the availability of bathrooms, knowing where a bathroom is when you go out. That can limit a lot of people who have issues around incontinence or are fearful of incontinence. The other kind of thing is affordability as well. If you're not on a bus route that's easily accessible to you, or on top of, you know, not on top of a steep hill in Nanaimo, for example, then also the affordability of a taxi cab becomes a real issue for many people who have low income. Finally, getting information is another thing that requires a systems approach. That's things like technology. Who doesn't have Zoom today or some such thing? Lots of people, you know, FaceTime. Many people don't have the resources or don't know how to use the resources that enable them to hook up with other people remotely, which is really important in this time. The cost, you know, don't underestimate the cost of things associated with technology as well. And then there's issues like literacy and language. Getting access to services is another barrier to social inclusion. And that's like finding the services. That's really hard. Those awful voicemails that you get where you have to go through 10 choices to get what you want. That's been identified as a real barrier by seniors. Finding services through, you know, then there's wait lists. Services are capped. The services are too little or too late to support your participation socially in the community, and things go downhill. Affordability is another thing that can create social isolation or contribute to it. You may, on a low income, you may have to choose between your medications, a hearing aid, your glasses, or joining the local gym, actually through the city, which is quite reasonable, but all those things add up on a low income. Finally, health, the kind of things around your own health, that's not just mobility, but it's things like energy limitations. And then the suitability of programming for seniors as well, thinking about long-term care in particular. There's what kind of programming is offered, how much of it's offered, how accessible that is, what times are offered. Men's programs are lacking greatly, culturally appropriate programs are lacking, the location of programs may be out of reach. So those are many of the factors that the New Horizons Pan-Canadian projects asked the projects to look at in terms of increasing seniors' inclusion in their communities. So we had a project here in Nanaimo, and like all the projects, we're supposed to increase the number of seniors who have support and help when they need it, participate regularly in activities, or feel connected to and valued by family, friends, and acquaintances. So we took a number of approaches to that. There were some individual programs like peer-to-peer programs that were developed that were culturally appropriate for different populations. And there were also community programs that were developed. Can I have the next slide, please? And systems-based ones as well. Yeah. In terms of the kinds of, I guess the kinds of things we did, intergenerational connections. There were a lot of, and this is not just Nanaimo, but a lot of intergenerational connection programs. For instance, here we did a paper pal program which linked children in grades 3 and 4 with seniors in long-term care or seniors in the community, and it was a pen pal idea that was literacy for the children, creating connection between the generations, and also ended with a tea where people came face to face and met the person that they had been communicating with. That was a very cool program, and it's operating in Victoria right now. Without the tea, of course, but certainly with the letter writing. We had somebody in one province made for teenagers, the Seniors Are Cool video in French and in English, which is online. And that was to sort of to reframe seniors for younger people. Anti-ageism, that was also an anti-ageism project, really. But we also did other things around anti-ageism. We created a toolkit for organizations about how to identify ageism and how to address ageism and avoid ageism in their own organizations. The other kind of thing that was done was an education and awareness through the arts around ageism in Quebec was very successful. ageism is a big issue because although there are no typical older people, society often views older people in stereotypical ways. That can lead to discrimination against individuals or groups simply because of age. You've heard, likely during COVID, the idea that those old people were just going to die anyway. And at one point, there was a saying going around about, I forget exactly how it goes, but basically the virus was, it really meant the virus wasn't a bad thing in terms of older adults, right? And I guess the other thing about ageism that we really have to be aware of is that when they're framed as dependent or a burden, older people are viewed a certain way when it comes to policy making. How much are we going to spend on older people if they're devalued? How much emphasis do we place on cost containment in our policies more than on our on care, for example? One of the things we did was had a health committee that looked at policies from the perspective of ageism and provided also an education program in Alberta for healthcare providers around ageism in acute care. Increasing access to information was huge for all the projects, and that meant that there were paper products, because that was often the most preferred, paper products, but in different languages, for example, around services. Also for information about the signs of social isolation. One of the things we did for facilitating community connections was to develop a champion training program, which was taken up by COSCO, which is the Canadian Organization of Seniors Organizations, I believe is the full term. They took it up and are using it as one of the national workshops. And that project was to have citizens educated in signs and symptoms of social isolation and also of the impact of social isolation on people, and be able to go out and become advocates for seniors, and also to identify seniors in the community and take certain actions. And those that were really socially isolated in a serious sort of way were referred to the crisis care people. That was a good one. The other one that I'm thinking about in Vancouver, they had an ambassadors program, which I doubt very much is operating right now, but they would train seniors who went around into public places and parks, and when they saw somebody sitting by themselves, somebody who looked lonely, they'd sit down, talk to them, and actually take them to possibly take them to a program, a seniors program that was scheduled ahead, perhaps on another day, once they found out their interest. They also just went around in public places and handed out brochures in different languages and about different area activities. Facilitating community connections, I think that would work. That certainly was very powerful in Vancouver, they found, for being able to get more people into their programs and socially connected. Facilitating leadership, all the projects were senior driven to varying degrees, and all the materials were vetted by seniors. And we're also, in one project, seniors were trained as speakers in talking about social isolation, social inclusion, and also about ageism. That was useful, I think, in terms of making people educating the public more about it. Here in Nanaimo, we did a play. Actually, we had commissioned and put a play on that was well received and is now on the internet. That was about multi-generational connection and social isolation, social inclusion. And finally, there was the one other thing I'll mention through the arts that was done was a photo voice project, and public galleries showed this photo voice project of where seniors took pictures, seniors who identified as feeling socially isolated or lonely, took pictures around the communities and then captioned them, and then those pictures were shown in terms of their impact on how they felt inclusive or not inclusively involved in their communities. Next slide, please. Okay, all those programs that I mentioned all had a bearing. Some were systems, and I should mention transportation. There were a lot of ways to address transportation problems too. But all of those programs depended on face-to-face contact by and large. We have some things now that are online. We made a repository for the many of the programs online, and I'll give you that website at the end, so that those remain in existence. But most things were done face-to-face, and of course with social isolation and COVID, that's been a problem in terms of maintaining these programs. Social distancing is actually counter to what we do usually as humans when we feel threatened, and many people feel threatened by COVID, and yet they're supposed to stay away from other people. As I mentioned earlier, not everybody has the technology to reach out to other people for support or to provide support, FaceTime, for example, or Zoom, but many people have a telephone. On the other hand, a lot of the people who are having to stay at home, who live alone, who are older, may not have a wide network of people that they can telephone and talk to. Forced social isolation, fear for health in the future leads to chronic stress with negative impacts on mental, emotional health for many, and there's research on that now. And I mean, forced social isolation is being in your singular bubble without having somebody else that you can talk to or actually see face to face. Thinking about long-term care, many of those people haven't seen a family member for months and months and months, never mind a friend. You know, so all this has negative impacts on how people are feeling. The usual strategies to increase connectedness may be unavailable. For example, you can't just join a group right now. I belong to an exercise class, but they're gone, you know. You can do it on Zoom, and I have Zoom, so that's not so bad. But many people don't and wouldn't use the technology if they did. The kinds of things that face-to-face things, joining groups, you know, it's just not in the cards at the moment. Even going grocery shopping, which might have been a social occasion for a relatively isolated person, isn't really that available right now, especially if you have chronic health issues. So reduced social connection and reduced participation is absolutely hand in hand with COVID. And there's a lot of information coming out now on how that affects people, and it's not good. Next one. Could I have the next? Okay. So everybody's risk is increased. I think the other thing that's happened with COVID is the shocking information that came out from Ontario in particular, but not only Ontario, about issues in long-term care facilities. You know, that has really been, I think, added to people's stress, older people's stress who have health issues and maybe are facing the idea that someday they might need those kind of supports. The other thing too with COVID is the availability of home support workers, continuity of care, very challenging in a COVID situation for people that were receiving those or other services at home. It's forced us to adapt and adjust to a new normal, and we're not there yet. And I think as well, some of us don't have, as I said, the same abilities that we had previously to adapt. We don't have the same, and that could be just because of COVID. You can't get out and use people like you used to, or be with people, but also the health changes and so forth can have happened in this period of time that limit the loss of a driver's license, all kinds of things in almost a year. We're getting up to a year. The need to manage stress and to cultivate positive mental health and emotional health has never been greater than it is now. Many people feel anxious or depressed by being forced to stay at home. And I'm not talking just about seniors now, I'm talking about many people who live alone are feeling anxious and stressed by isolation and also by financial factors that may be impacting on them. Not being able to see grandchildren, all those kinds of things. So one of the things we need to do, that all of us, is we need to develop new ways to connect and to remain positive as much as we can, because this isn't over yet. Next slide. So here's just some ideas for the community. You know, learning the technology, and if you have a computer, there are things online that teach you to use Zoom and this platform that we're using right now. Some of it's free. Some of it enables you to have, you know, multiple, like I had a book club on Zoom last night, a book club meeting, for example. Once people have Zoom or some such thing, you can have group get-togethers, you know, just as you did. There's a cooking group I notice on Zoom that some people have where they're all in their kitchens following the same recipe. You know, a little creativity, and with the technology, certainly learning FaceTime if you have an iPhone, but not everybody does, is also a really important way to connect. One of the things in these pan-Canadian projects we did was try to teach people how to use technology. There are places where you can learn that through the libraries. For example, here in Nanaimo, you can call up and they'll walk you through setting up Zoom and being able to use it. So there are some resources in some communities for that. Signing up for a course online, it's an opportunity. We've got lots of time. There's digital ones, there's university ones, there's language courses. And I came across a website called Go Boomerang, which has, some are free, some you pay a little bit of money for, but creative workshops, learning new skills workshops, also well-being workshops, and sort of a community forum as well that looks really interesting. So there are things, if you have access and are able to use online tools, there are things out there. Volunteers, if you want to volunteer, if you need a volunteer, the 211 number is the one to call. That can be very useful. They can set you up with a telephone buddy, as likely can your local volunteer organization here. They are setting people up who want a phone buddy. Building a skill, of course, there's opportunities again. You can play bridge online if you want to. Again, it's online. So many things are online, and I think that's one of the biggest messages for me, who doesn't have the technology to show my picture or to show myself on this this webinar that we're doing, is if you have to learn the technology. It's the same, it's as important as using a telephone these days. And if you can't afford the technology, it's available in the libraries for free, though there's the issues of masks and so forth right now. But going forward, if you have the capacity and the means, it's a really important skill to build. Other skills that one can build, you know, let your imagination run wild, really. As I say, there's cooking programs, language programs, all kinds of things. And finally, you can even do exercise programs, which I have done and actually works out quite well. And there's programs for yoga, for mindfulness, all kinds of things online, support groups that you can find through, again, online. But there are also, I believe through the BC Family Caregivers, or sorry, it's Family Caregivers of British Columbia, there is a, they can match you up in a group to talk about, just to socialize, really. Okay, next slide. So finally, social isolation and long-term care. Right now, of course, staff are the most significant contact, because many people haven't got visitors, frequent visitors at the best of times, and those that do don't necessarily have family coming in to see them now because of the various rules that are primarily set by each facility in terms of who they can, how they can manage people coming in, how well they can protect people that are in the facility from COVID. There's system issues that make relational care difficult. Of course, we know that, and that's short staffing. That's when you don't have continuity of care, and that is again accentuated right now to some extent because people, especially in some facilities, are rather short-staffed. At the same time, the one-site rule means that there are more of the same people in the same facility than previously. Lockdown and quarantining has certainly increased isolation. As I say, there's a huge movement by families who are trying to become essential visitors or even social visitors, and the Bonnie Henry's edict is interpreted by each facility. So some people haven't seen their family members for months upon months. Not everybody can use FaceTime, which is the alternative, or even telephone calls, especially when there's dementia. That can become problematic. The impact on residents' well-being and mental health and on families too is certainly real, and has been looked at in various research projects and also ongoing research projects. And just today, a position paper came out from the Canadian Academy of Geriatric Psychiatry and Canadian Coalition for Seniors Mental Health that looks at the impact, looks at the need for mental health services during COVID and onwards, and the impact on residents, staff, and family. The uneven application of visiting rules I just mentioned, and then finally, you know, everything that we've seen as a result of COVID is really just an exacerbation of systems problems, the staffing, the mix of staffing, the focus, the model of care that have just been exacerbated. Can I have the next slide, please? So what we did, Action for Reform of Residential Care, as a voluntary, nonpartisan citizens group made up of researchers, clinicians who do or have worked in long-term care, families, and seniors. And we created a report for the government that we intend to support them in moving forward in long-term care. We didn't focus on COVID. Instead, what we focused on were the systemic issues that are, everybody knows are long-standing in relation to the workforce, in relation to the model of care. We want to see a move to person-centered relational care that puts quality life right at the center, and human rights as well. We want to see a well-supported and adequate number of staff, quality of life that is the focus, quality of care. We were shocked when we went through the monitoring process and also went back and looked at the process that led to the 4 retirement concept facilities being put under administration in BC, at the inadequacy of monitoring and the ability to enforce the quality of care and life. We created quality of life standards that we hope will be adopted. We mandated family councils, or asked the government to mandate family councils to give families a voice, and also to eliminate profit making at the cost to seniors and staff. Those essentially are the key points that we made with the ministry. And we did have a meeting with Mabel Elmore, who is the Parliamentary Secretary for Seniors and Long-Term Care, on January 12th, where we asked her to strike a task force to take action on our recommendations, a multi-stakeholder task force. We have huge support from labor, from professional organizations, from key influencers for the report, for the recommendations the report made, that we are going to be building on, because we do believe that that is what enabled us to have that meeting with Mabel Elmore, and that hopefully will come to fruition of some sort. So that is all that I want to say about that, except the next slide. So most of you, everybody likely is in communities, so I've shared some ideas about what people can do who are socially isolated in the community to improve their well-being. If you want to participate and take action in terms of long-term care, it would be great if you could share the ARC report with other people. We are sending it to all the MLAs and to the MPs from BC to become an ARC member, because the more members we have, the more support, the more credible we appear. We are credible, but the more weight that gives our recommendations. And we are going to be sending out a petition in the next week or so about national standards to the federal government that we will be circulating and will be on our website. Everybody can do something to address social isolation in the community and also in long-term care, where I think people are feeling it the most right now. Thank you. The last slide has some resources on it. If you just want to put that one up. Okay. Is that the last slide? Okay. Yeah, I just put some links here, some ideas for activities while socially isolating, and tips for battling anxiety during COVID is another one. And I will send the Go Boomerang link to Mary Lou, as well as a link to something else I came across just today that might be useful to people. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Dr. McCourt. That was really, that was a comprehensive overview of so many things, and there's an awful lot of work going on in the community. So congratulations for you and all of the activities that you have led and supported and encouraged in your community and across the province in Canada. So we would love to have some questions. We have a little bit of time, I think. Penny, that you can still stay for a few questions. So if you again put your questions in the chat box or press the raise your hand button, and Christine will help.
And thanks, Barbara. We have lots of questions coming in here. The first one is, who has access to the programs you've described, and how did they help?
Okay, it's a question of who had right now, because the projects ended in spring of 2018, I believe. They ended across Canada, and in some communities, some of them have been maintained. Like, for instance, the Champion project I mentioned has been maintained here in Nanaimo, or was until COVID. I actually couldn't say for sure right now, but there is a website, Senior Social Isolation, senior without an S, seniorsocialisolation.ca, where all those programs, many programs from across Canada, as well as reports and various other documents, are stored and available for anybody. When with projects were provided, if that was a question, when the ones I mentioned were provided, they were open to anybody in the community.
And there was a second part to that. How did they hear about them?
How did they hear about them? We had a huge awareness campaigns. I think every project had a huge awareness campaign and developed partnerships. All of these projects were partnership based. So that Champions one I mentioned, for example, we had several community partners. So there was an effort everywhere really to link up with all the relevant, I wouldn't say relevant, but all the organizations serving seniors or who didn't actually serve seniors, but who had access to seniors, if you like. In other words, may not have joined that organization, but that organization knew about that seniors population down in that assisted living center, for example.
Great, and people are really excited about your resources. So the answer to the question is yes, those will be available. We'll email them out to you. Another question here, I'm not seeing any hands up, so I'll keep going to the chat. What would be the best way to advocate for all family members who visit people living in long-term care to be moved up on the priority list for vaccination?
Oh boy, that's a good one. I will send you a link to Brenda Brophy, who's leading the charge on getting more essential visitors and social visitors into long-term care. It's actually a Facebook support group from all over BC where people are talking about their experiences and supporting each other. And one group has hired a lawyer, I know that's been in touch with the ministry. Other than that, trying to get up on the list, Mark's likely a better person to ask for that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just either feel free to pop them in the chat or use your hands up there. Oh, I think that was that Meg? I'm just going to unmute you. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I typed in the question, but perhaps you can't see it. I was just wondering if there's any evidence-based studies that we could use for advocating for reducing profit-making services for seniors.
There's quite a lot of stuff actually. I think the main person in Canada right now is Pat Armstrong out of Ontario, who has spoken at many webinars, along with Margaret McGregor at UBC is another person. And they did a 10-year project looking at long-term care internationally, including in Canada. And I forget, it's called it's not called this, but it's something about leading practices, tensions in long-term care. They looked at a number of issues. There's also an excellent book on privatization that was written as an offshoot of that, privatization and long-term care. I can send that information. And then I would look at the Canadian policy, what's it called? Canadian policy alternatives. I cannot remember the full name of it, but again, I can send you that link, because recently there was an article there on privatization and long-term care, the issues around privatization and long-term care. And of course, there's the Seniors Advocates report, A Billion Reasons to Care. And looking into some of those references, I think you would find quite a bit. So I'll send you those 4 references. I will send them to Christine, who can pass them on.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions before we go to a short break? Meg again? Hang on, Meg, you should be able to unmute.
Sorry, no, that was, no, that, I was trying to put my hand down. I think I must have put it up.
No worries. And there's a question also about the captioning. We are having some technical challenges with the captioning, and on the break, we'll see if we can get that working fully. For those of you who are wishing to access the captioning in the meantime, we have provided a link to everyone in the chat box so that you can access the transcript as it's live. Shirley, hang on, I'll unmute you. Okay, Shirley, you should be able to unmute. Oh, hang on, let's try again. There you go.
Okay, thank you for a very thorough webinar. I'm really appreciating this. And I recognize that there is a need to send this kind of presentation to committees that are being formed in small communities who are dealing with age-related issues, and they want to improve the circumstances of seniors. So I will send mine to a recent committee that's been formed in Merritt, which is where I live. But I am encouraging you to connect with other cities, like do a mass mail out online to all these communities, because we are all starting to deal with these same kinds of issues, whether we have one small retirement, what do you call it, retirement center, whether we have not enough facilities for seniors. They deal with social isolation as well, whether they need to develop more centers for people to meet. I just think that it would do so much good for them to hear your presentation. So please send it further afield to all these different communities, because I'm sure we're not the only ones who are establishing these committees. We all are starting to recognize the need and what power these changes can have for us seniors moving forward and those to come up next. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I'm just thinking that an umbrella for some of this stuff that we had when we were working in the senior social isolation area was age-friendly communities. We had a seniors-driven age-friendly community strategy that was developed here in this community, and also I believe in Edmonton and other cities that there are other cities that have age-friendly community strategies right now, which looks at the really big picture of transportation as well as the kind of recreational options that are available to people, health and so on. And many smaller communities were part of that age-friendly community initiative. It might be worth looking online for that, just at age-friendly communities and Canadian, and just see what you come up with. There might be one nearby you too. They provide a template for going forward, I think.
Thank you.
All right, so Barb, does that take us to break time?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Well, thank you, everyone. That was, and thanks, Penny, again. That was very, that was illuminating. And so now we're going to take a 5-minute break, so we have a little chance to stretch our legs before we come back and hear from our next speaker. That'll start at 2. Is that correct? Do you want to? It's still 5 minutes. So that still works, Christine. But in preparation for our next speaker, there's something really important. We want you to bring back a drink or a beverage so that we will be attending to that with the next speaker. So a little mystery. Make sure you bring back a beverage when you come back to your seat. So see you in 5 minutes. I'm going to go fill my glass.
Liz, do you want to just say something and we'll make sure your mic is all good?
Sure, testing. So Christine, you want to do the slides?
We will try running the slides from here. I'm going to take the next few minutes to see if we can get the captioning up and running. That should be overlying your slides.
Oh, because I don't think
you'll be able to run it from there.
Christine, you're not the same. I changed a few things. I just thought they were backup, right? So since yesterday morning when I sent them to you, they probably look a little different.
So can I access those through the Dropbox?
Could in about 2 minutes, but I guess if you did just run them through and then I can see what's different. If that's okay, can you do that, or you?
Sure. I'm just also trying to get the captioning, but let's just do a quick run through.
Well, don't worry then. I'll just, I can fly. It wasn't that big a deal. It probably isn't as many changes as I think, but it's okay. Just leave it and we'll be good.
No, it's okay. Here, just so you know what the differences are. Okay, just see if I can move those for you.
Yeah. Oh, good. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Mary Lou?
Yes,
Do
yes.
you know how many people are on the call?
I think there was 240 or so registered and maybe a few more. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of people.
yes. Oh, and Liz,
Mhm.
just to mention, the other thing that we're finding is really a great resource are the actual recordings of the sessions that are
Oh.
being nicely used as well. So like today
Great.
I had 3 messages from people saying just unexpectedly can't attend, when will the recordings be up? So it's just
Good.
another resource.
That's nice. Can you hear my snoring dog? There's nothing I can do really. He'll just do his thing.
It's a tiny sound.
On my husband's voice dictation, it comes off as roll, roll, roll.
That's so funny. Oh, that's funny.
Simon, Simon.
Liz, is it sunny where you live right now?
It's kind of high overcast. Yeah, but
The
I can
sun-
see the sun over there.
The sun just came out. It's really lovely.
I've got a beautiful view of the mountains, so.
That's a little bit better than other houses.
All right, I may be able to get your captioning moved to the correct place for you. I apologize. This is our first try at this, and it hasn't worked perfectly for us. But I also am aware that we want to get going, and so we'll turn it over to Barb.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Christine. So now it's time for our second guest this afternoon. So today we have Dr. Liz Drance, and Dr. Drance is a geriatric psychiatrist, and she's a clinical associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at UBC. And she has had a long career and a long interest in caring for people with dementia-related behaviors. She spent the last 2 years as part of a team caring for dementia caregivers at St. Paul's Hospital. If you know Liz, you know she's a trained facilitator of 2 key group therapy approaches for dementia caregiving, the CARERS program and mindfulness-based dementia care. She has completed a 2-year mindfulness meditation teacher certification program with with Jack Cornfield and Tara Bra, and 2 of the world's most respected mindfulness teachers. I know she introduced them to me, and now I get their emails every day. So today, Dr. Drance's presentation is Growing Older and Wiser, Mindfulness and Aging. This presentation will introduce all of us to the practice of mindfulness and to the potential benefits for us as we age. So if you have any questions for Dr. Drance, please just put them into the chat box, or you can press the raise your hand button later. And so right now, I'd love to introduce and welcome you to Dr. Drance. Thanks so much, Liz.
Thanks, Barb. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. Just want to encourage everyone that if you can, the little box where you have all your mute buttons and everything, you can minimize that by just clicking on the little red arrow at the very top. So that will mean it interferes less with the slides. So just that's an offering that I'll just make. And I'm going to have a hard time. This is a very good challenge for me, actually, the closed captioning, to not get distracted and repeat what I'm by starting to read what's there. So this is a good working for my attention. So here we go. It was wonderful to hear Penny's introduction around social isolation and different approaches to supporting all of us as we get older, and where we may feel socially isolated, or whether we're younger and feeling socially isolated in the context of COVID. So my topic today is growing older and wiser, and how we can integrate mindfulness into life and why that might serve us well as we do age. So you can turn the next slide. So I'm going to offer you a time just to have a reflection. So you might feel comfortable closing your eyes as I ask you these questions, or if you have a piece of paper and a pen, you might just want to jot some notes down. Nobody's going to ask you for this; is just for you. But I'm going to just ask, when we explore our thoughts about growing older, the first question that I'd have for you is, what concerns do you have about growing older? What concerns do you have about growing older? So just take a moment or two to reflect on that. What are some of the issues that concern you about growing older? And then move your attention to the question of, what do you look forward to as you grow older? What do you look forward to as you look ahead in your life? What are you anticipating and looking forward to? And the third question is, what tools are you bringing with you as you negotiate this part of your life experience? So what tools are you bringing with you as you enter this period of growing older? So interestingly, Penny was talking about ageism, and so I'm interested in how much of the concerns we express when we look at growing older really don't bear out in terms of people as they actually age. But some of the concerns that I hear from people about growing older are concerns around loss of purpose, or loss of role, or a change in ability. So some people are really concerned about loss of independence physically, or some people are concerned about loss of independence cognitively. Some people are really concerned about pain levels and what that will be like as they grow older. And then there's the loss of people that we love. So those are some of the really common concerns that we hear. Now, what do you look forward to? More time to pursue interests, or opportunities to explore new or supporting my family and really being involved with my grandchildren, or more time to be and less requirement to do. These are some of the things we might hear people tell us. And what tools are you bringing with you for this leg of the journey? And some people will say, well, creativity, or curiosity, or I'm really focusing on my physical health and my brain health, keeping myself stimulated. So I think two of the tools that we need to bring, and I'll ask for the next slide. I think what we need to bring with us our wisdom, or cultivate wisdom and cultivate resilience. And this saying by Rumi says, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I'm changing myself. So we have opportunities not so much to change ourselves as to grow our wisdom and grow into that well-being as we grow older. And if we bring and really focus on growing that as we do age, we are far more likely to actually also be resilient. So what do I mean by wisdom? And so I'll just go to the next slide, please. Right, so it says, what do wisdom and how do wisdom and resilience look alike? What do they have in common? Well, wisdom, and this is a definition, and these are the components of wisdom that were defined recently by Dilip Geste, who's a geriatric psychiatrist and has just written a very interesting book called Wiser that was published last year. And he says that what the literature would suggest is that to really be wise, and wisdom is the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment. So having experience, knowledge, and good judgment. So we can bring experience as we get older, we can bring our knowledge as we get older, and we want to continue to keep developing our judgment, our good judgment. So one of the things, so these are some of the factors. So self-reflection, we need to be able to look at ourselves, take an honest look at where we can grow, where we have the potential to develop and do that. We have to be able to accept uncertainty and accept diversity of views. So having an openness and a willing to acknowledge that there are differences and to respect differences. We need to be decisive when we need to be decisive. That's part of being wise. And then we need to regulate our emotions, because if our emotions are running amok, it's very hard to make good decisions. And that depends on being able to just kind of regulate our emotional energy. We need compassion for self and others, according to Geste, and the whole notion of spirituality, being connected in with something greater than our small s self. And that could be the divine, it could be our interconnectedness as you know, as a humanity and beyond that, but our common humanity. If you look at resilience, and this is from a book, Everyday Resilience, written by my friend Gail Gazelle, she talks about there being 5, and actually there's another one that I need to put on there, but flexibility, so being flexible with our thinking mostly, not so much our physical flexibility, although that's good to work on too, but our emotional sort of our outlook. We really need to be able to roll with the waves, and COVID is really teaching us that. Perseverance, we need to hang on when things are difficult and recognize that if I persevere, things do change. They often change sooner than I imagine. Again, interestingly, to be resilient, you need emotional regulation, and you need self-care and self-compassion. And then connections, which really sort of ties into the spirituality aspects of things. And Penny was talking about that we all need to be able to handle the difficulties that come our way. We need a strong social network. So next slide, please. So one skill that really supports the growth of both wisdom and resilience and supports our well-being is, and if you would press the button again, mindfulness. And next slide, please. So what we're going to do in the half an hour that I have, because we want to leave time for questions, is we're just going to talk a little bit about how much time we spend in our lives on autopilot. And then we're going to explore the term mindfulness, and we'll do some in the moment mindfulness meditation practices, and then really 6 reasons or 6 ways that the skill of mindfulness actually helps us develop resilience, wisdom, and our well-being. Next slide, please. So here we are. This is you standing right in the middle there, and your body is present. You can see that you're standing in the present, and the body can only be in the present. But where would your mind be, do you think? Well, if you're like most people, you're standing here, but your mind is somewhere else. And that often means that you are thinking either about the future and worrying or planning or thinking about what might happen, which is kind of reflecting on what might happen as we grow older, or you're busy thinking about the past and either how things went so well and you wish you were back in that time, or how things didn't go well and you wish you could replay them. But regardless, we are kind of a lot of the time lost in thought. And when we're lost in thought, we're on autopilot. Now, autopilot is essential. It allows us to do the rote tasks of life without putting all our conscious energy into them. Can you imagine if every time you brushed your teeth, you actually had to pay attention to each particular step? Or if you were washing dishes and you had to literally pay attention to each time you rubbed the cloth on the plate? You never get anything done. So autopilot and being away in our thoughts into more complex thinking is a gift, right? The problem is we're so good at it, we spend almost all our 50% of our time on autopilot, 50% of our time, our mind wandering away from where we are. Now, the good part is I can tie my shoelaces and make a plan for the next thing, and that's very efficient. The problem is when I'm spending all my time with my mind somewhere other than the present moment, I'm lost in my thoughts. And when I'm thinking on autopilot, autopilot is fast, it's unconscious, and it's biased to what's familiar. So it leads us to react in ways we've always reacted to things in our lives. And it sort of also pushes us down these kind of reactive pathways. So we don't always want to be on autopilot because we miss out on a lot of the beauty of life. And in order to do that, we have to bring our thoughts into the same place as our body, into this moment, which is the one we've got right now. Right. When we are lost in autopilot, we are lost in our heads. We are in our conceptual mind. So we're thinking concept. Okay, so we're thinking about life rather than living it. Next slide, please. So Annie Lamott, who's one of my favorite writers, says, my mind is a bad neighborhood that I try not to go into alone. And that's, if you're like most of us, the mind often moves towards the more negative thoughts. And why is that? Well, we have a negativity bias that's evolutionarily created. So safety and keeping ourselves safe always wins out. And so the mind is always looking for danger. It's always kind of keeping an eye on how things are going, whether I'm safe in this moment, whether it's going well. And because of that, we're often leaning towards the more negative side of things, because that's where safety is found, in looking for what's negative and making sure we don't go down the wrong path. Because if you were a lizard and you just enjoyed the present moment and never looked around you, you'd be somebody's lunch. So the negativity bias is just the way the mind naturally thinks, even though we don't necessarily have the same requirement to be as vigilant as the lizard did. So humans can take it a little bit more easily. We can actually let go of that negativity bias, or not worry about how we're doing as much as other species, but we come by it naturally. The other thing is that our thinking, that conceptual mind, is always measuring discrepancies between where we are and where we were, what we wish we had back, or where we are and where we would like to be. So the problem is we're constantly thinking how we're not measuring up. And so we're rarely satisfied with where we are when we are stuck in that conceptual mind. Next slide, please. So what's the outcome of being stuck in being lost in thought? Well, like this little teacup who's kind of lost in thought. What if nobody likes me? What if I taste weird? What if I'm too cold? Oh, what if I'm too hot? Look, what if I'm just right and I can never live up to that again? That's kind of the ultimate discrepancy monitoring going on there. And so when we're lost in our thoughts, as I mentioned, we're kind of reactive to rather than responsive to stresses that go on in our life. We really are kind of dissatisfied with how things are because they're either not how they were or they're not how we want them to be. We try to control the uncontrollable. Well, good luck. COVID has shown us that we need to recognize what's not controllable and figure out ways to relate to it in ways that don't bring us too far down. We miss out on the vibrancy of life if we are, and what's good about life if we are lost in our thought. And all of those things can lead to stress, anxiety, and depression. Next slide, please. So Judson Brewer says we can't think our way to well-being. And that's kind of what I'm saying, is if we're lost in thought, we can't rely on our thinking all the time to move into well-being. So what's the alternative? Well, we can use our experiential mode of mind, the mind that is related to our senses, related to what's happening right here and now. And because when we come back into this present moment, we're often struck by how much better it is than where we were in our head. So the experiential mind only exists in this present moment, like right now. And it's constantly shifting and changing. So experiences are rising and falling away. So the experiential mind is just always open to what's coming and going. That's really the kind of mind that animals have, really sort of living the raw experience of life. Now, as I mentioned, you wouldn't want to spend your entire life in that mode, but you do want to be able to choose. When do I want to live in my conceptual mind? And when might it be a more beautiful place to be in my here and now place? So really connecting in with that experiential mode of thinking helps us to step out of a suffering mindset and into the here and now, because suffering is often thinking. And the more we use it, the more we see things really clearly and really vibrantly, and not clouded by our busy, conditioned, conceptual minds. So why don't we so I hope everybody has something to drink, and I'm going to offer a short reflection. So I'd really like to start with for you to close your eyes and think about taking a drink of this beverage that's in front of you. Just close your eyes and just imagine yourself taking a drink. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you to follow my invitations to you, and let's actually take that drink together. So we're going to take a mindful sip of the drink. So I invite you to put your hand on the container of the beverage and notice how the container feels in your hand. Maybe check on the temperature, the texture. Is it smooth or rough? Maybe notice how the shape feels in your hand. Really look at the container and look at its color. And now inviting you to lift the container up and bring it towards your mouth, but watch what muscles, watch what happens to the hand and the arm. Really connect in with the sensations of what it takes to bring this beverage to your lips. And then inviting you just to put the rim of the container against your lips and sense what you feel there. What do you notice? Is the texture the same as in your hands? Does it feel different? And now just breathe in and see if you can take in any aroma that may be coming from the beverage. And then inviting you now to actually take a sip. Holding it in your mouth for a moment. Tasting it. What does it taste like? Is it sweet? Is it tasteless? Is it smooth? Is there texture in it? And then noticing when you feel ready to swallow, what did the tongue actually have to do to get that drink down into your throat? And now that it's gone, what are you aware of in the mouth now? So there's a great example of thinking about taking a drink, using my conceptual mind to think about taking a drink versus mindfully taking a sip and noticing those different pieces of that very simple activity that we take for granted. So I'm going to invite you to change the slide for me. So what is mindfulness? Okay, so mindfulness it's an awareness. Mindfulness is the awareness that arises when we purposefully direct our attention somewhere, where we purposefully pay attention, where? To this moment's experience, right here and right now, without judging the experience, okay? Being open to what's happening right now, to being curious about what's happening right now, and to be totally willing to be with whatever arises. So mindfulness is the awareness that arises when we pay attention to the present moment without judgment and with openness and curiosity, and to see what's there. So we've got two people going for a walk in the park. The one on the left is obviously walking and perhaps is on autopilot. So thinking of all kinds of different things. And then the other person is walking and they are seeing exactly what's in front of them. They're in the present moment. So the one on the left is full of mind, mindful, and the one on the right is mindful. And who do you think might be enjoying the walk more? So mindfulness simply means then paying attention to what's happening right now and being open to it and not judging it. And that's one of the biggest challenges, is the not judging and being open and curious to this present moment. Because the mind always thinks, oh, not this moment, I can think of something much more interesting. But when we train the attention to come into this present moment, all kinds of interesting things happen. So we'll move to the next slide. How do we grow our mindfulness practice? How do we grow our experience in living mindfully? Well, we can do it in two ways. One, using formal mindfulness practices where we actually say, I'm going to take a time out of my life and I'm going to either meditate. So I'm going to do mindfulness meditation where I focus my attention usually on an anchor like a breath, and I'm just going to focus. And every time the mind wanders, I'll invite it back. And I do that for maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And we're really training the attention to come back to this present moment. And every time my thoughts move away, I might get kind of critical because I know the idea is to pay attention to this present moment. That's a judgment. So I'm going to notice that and be kind of interested. Wow, look at the judgments that are arising. And so that's a mindfulness meditation. You can also have an in-the-moment mindfulness practice, and that's where we pause and we check in with how we're doing in this moment. And we're just kind of taking a step out of our everyday experience to check in, and we'll do one of those practices in a minute. Then there's mindful movement and yoga, Tai Chi. Those are examples of mindful movement when they are used in their mindfulness, as a mindful movement. Sometimes people just want to get the exercise out of yoga and they're not attending to what the body is doing as they move. So that's the formal mindfulness practices, when we say, I'm taking this time out and I'm going to really focus in on being mindful. The informal mindfulness practices is like life every day. So what I mentioned, when we took a drink, when we took a sip, you can decide, I'm going to eat this meal, or I'm going to eat the first few bites of this meal mindfully, and imagine what it might feel like to have those first 3 bites, focus only on those first 3 bites. Or if I'm in a shower, instead of planning the rest of my day, I'm actually experiencing the water on my skin. I'm experiencing the lather on my skin. I'm experiencing the shampoo in my hair, the warmth. I can be either really present with that, and that would be an example of informal mindfulness practice. Or when you go for a walk in nature, to really connect in, not with what I think about that tree, but just taking it in all its sensory glory. So formal mindfulness practices, informal mindfulness practices. So let's do one, and we're going to skip the next slide and just go to the one after that, please, Christine. So this is the stop practice. It's and so each step of the practice is spelled is a letter of the word stop. So we're going to do this practice together, but this is one of those practices you can pull out anytime. And when we when I'm supporting family members who are caring for someone living with cognitive change, they'll tell you this is bar none one of the best practices, because when they're getting into a sticky time, they know to stop. And stop, the S stands for stop whatever you're doing. So you're going to pause. You're going to put in a real, just stop. Then you're going to invite yourself to take a few deep breaths. And it could be 1 deep breath, or it could be 3 deep breaths, but maybe to the count of 4 or 6 in and out 6, maybe to the count of 6 or 8. Whatever you can do that allows you to slow your breathing down, because when we slow our breath down, we connect with that rest and digest part of the nervous system. You're going to observe. So O means observe, and it means observe what's happening right now. So observe what's happening in my body, observe what thoughts I'm having, and observe what feelings are there right now. So yeah, I'm going to stop and pay attention to my physical sensations, thoughts, and feelings. And then P, I'm going to pause again, and I'm going to say, okay, what needs my attention right now? When I'm feeling this way, what can I do to support myself moving forward? So how can I move in the direction of what's needed? And then praise yourself. That's the other part of P. Praise yourself for taking the pause. So we'll do it together. We're going to just to see what it's like to just pause in the middle of your day today, in the middle of this talk. So you could close your eyes, and if you prefer not to close your eyes, you can just lower them to the floor in a kind of a receptive gaze, and just ask yourself to stop. I'm going to stop right here. So inviting yourself to stop. And now take 3 slow, deep breaths, maybe to the count of 4 in and the count of 6 out. Through your nose, through your mouth, whatever you find most comforting or comfortable. And now move to the O. So check in. How am I feeling right now? So what am I noticing in my body? Am I noticing any tension? Am I noticing any places of warmth or cool? What am I thinking right now? What thoughts are there right now? What feelings am I having? There might be nothing in terms of feelings, nothing really major, but checking in with yourself. And then asking yourself, wow, okay, what most needs my attention right now? So for me, I kind of noticed that my shoulders were up in a little bit of tension. So I'm going to just invite them to just relax a bit. So it might be to relax the body, or just to notice that I'm maybe thinking about what I'm going to be doing after this presentation, and I'm going to invite myself to this present moment. I'm going to invite myself back in. And then I'm just going to say a word of praise to myself, like, well done, you took a moment out of your busy day. So that's an in-the-moment mindfulness practice, and it can be incredibly helpful when you are maybe having a challenging conversation with your child, or with your husband, or with your partner, or your parent, and you can sense that things are going a bit askew. It's really a great idea to just say, hey, hold on a second, I just need to go to the washroom. Step out of the room and pull out your stop practice and check in with yourself. What is it you're needing right now? How can you settle yourself to re-enter the conversation if it's a difficult one? What are you needing, and what do you imagine they might be needing as well? So the stop practice, people tell us, by far is one of the most practical tools. And once you get good at it, you can do it in about 10 seconds. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. So we're just going to touch in on 6 ways that practicing mindfulness grows wisdom, resilience, and well-being. Reminding, what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is the awareness that arises when we pay attention to this present moment, what's happening right here and now, without judgment and with an openness and a curiosity and a willingness to be with whatever is there. So that's mindfulness. So why is it helpful to use mindfulness to grow resilience? Let's go to the next slide. So the first reason is that mindfulness connects us with the vibrancy of life. So as I mentioned, if we are stuck in the conceptual mind, we're often missing out on the beauty that is by the side of the road. Munindraji was a well-known meditation teacher, and someone asked him, Munindraji, why do you meditate? And everybody stood around thinking it was going to be some wild pronouncement. And he said, I meditate so that I can see the small blue flowers at the side of the road, which I would miss otherwise. And that's what mindfulness helps us to do. We're only well, I don't know how many times we're in this life, but in this life that I have right now, I want to be really taking part in it. I want to really experience it. And so mindfulness really helps us to do that. It also then helps us to slow down and to smell the coffee or smell the roses, and immerse ourselves in beauty and in goodness. And that counteracts that natural negativity bias that I talked about a little bit earlier. So slowing down, taking in what's lovely in this moment helps me to grow the good in my brain. Okay, next slide, please. So in this slide says, becoming awake involves seeing our confusion more clearly. So what mindfulness does is it helps us to clearly see what's actually happening, not the stories in my head, not the beliefs I have that color everything, that are the way my conceptual mind works. When I slow down and I pay attention to what's happening, I see things more clearly. And that's a very helpful part of getting older, because if all I do is worry about what might be coming, I'm actually missing out on the fact that in this moment, I'm just fine. So this is one of the reasons why mindfulness also helps us work with anxiety. All right, next slide, please. Next slide. So the third thing that mindfulness does is it really helps, by slowing us down, helps us to react less and to respond more, to respond wisely to whatever situation is arising. So that really helps us be more resilient, doesn't it? And next slide will show us how that works. If I'm on autopilot, I'm the little marionette that my mind is just moving around at will. If something happens in that moment, I'm not really there to sort it out. What's going to happen is I react. Okay, my response goes from stimulus to reaction. Click again, please. But with mindfulness, when I slow down and I practice slowing down, which is what mindfulness meditation helps me to do, I see a stimulus happens, I become aware of that stimulus. Then I have a choice about how do I want to respond in this situation, and then I respond. Okay, so a great example would be a difficult conversation that I used to have with my husband. He would say certain things and they would be a total trigger, and I would be off to the angry retorts, and I would be really annoyed, and it would make for a really difficult afternoon. Now, as I've practiced mindfulness more and more and more, he will say something and I'll be aware, because I check in and I go, whoa, what's happening in the body? And I can feel that heat rising and that tension. And I can hear myself saying, oh, he always, I hate when, and I can hear the conversation and the judgments about what's happening. But because I'm slowing down and listening, I then can say, and what am I needing in this moment? What's he needing in this moment? How do we get there? And then I will be able to say, wow, I'm really noticing how triggered I was by what you said. Like, that was difficult to hear. Can we, can we take a pause? Can we figure out a different way to approach this? And it's a different afternoon. So mindfulness helps us really to move from reactivity into responsivity. Okay, on to the next slide, please. Mindfulness also helps us to recognize and accept the things that we cannot change. Okay, so it helps us to find the courage to let go of what I can't change. And that's a very important part of wisdom, and it's a very important part of resilience. So practicing mindfulness grows wholehearted, unrestricted cooperation with the unavoidable. So the uncertainty and challenge, it helps us figure out, how do I work with this? Yeah, COVID is here. So how do I work wisely with the restrictions? How do I work wisely to support well-being in the rest of the population? How do I, work wisely with my loneliness? So mindfulness practice kind of helps us to stop fighting against things that we can't control. So pain would be a great example of that. I can't necessarily control that I have arthritis, but if I resist that pain and think I shouldn't have it, or I should be able to do something different about it, or I hate this pain, all of that actually ends up with me experiencing more suffering than I need to. So if I can work with, how do I stop resisting the pain? How do I stop fighting what's uncontrollable? It actually diminishes my suffering, and actually, in many ways, diminishes my preoccupation or my disability related to the pain, because there's another layer to the pain, then what goes on in my brain, and then that causes suffering. So at a minimum, if I know what is my mind making things worse, I can start to work with my mind. I might not be able to do much about my pain. So accepting what is doesn't mean becoming passive about it. But the only way we can make wise decisions on how to move forward is to really accept that this is how it is now. So I have to see it first before I can decide how to move forward. And mindfulness helps me to do that. Okay, so next slide, please. Mindfulness also really one wing. So if we think about mindfulness, one wing is wisdom, helps us grow our wisdom. And the other wing of the bird, if it's a bird and one wing is wisdom, the other bird is compassion. And mindfulness practice and coming into this present moment and being kind to myself when I wander away and need to come back to my anchor over and over, it really helps me to develop more kindness to myself and more compassion for myself, as well as compassion for others who are struggling. And that's something that the world needs more, and I do better when I'm actually really being kind to myself. People often think that if we are compassionate to ourselves, we'll get lazy or complacent, and it's shown through the literature that we respond better to carrots than to sticks. And compassion is a beautiful carrot that we culture, that we can grow as we practice mindfulness and meditation. So I'm going to move on in the interest of time, because I'd like to move forward a couple of slides to number 6. So forward, keep going. And just to touch in on the health benefits, this is great, of mindfulness. And this doesn't necessarily contribute quite so much to wisdom necessarily, or resilience, but this is really important as we grow older. So there are physiological benefits to practicing mindfulness and growing our mindfulness, our ability to pay attention to the present moment. And some of them are physiological. So research is demonstrating that, as I mentioned, mindfulness could really help us deal with chronic pain. It can be part of lowering blood pressure in hypertension. It can't be necessarily always the whole answer. It's not a panacea, but it can certainly help us lower our blood pressure somewhat. It reduces inflammation. So things like autoimmune diseases and inflammatory arthritis, mindfulness can actually assist in reducing inflammation to some degree. Again, not a panacea, not going to fix everything, but it's lovely to be able to know I'm doing something that's contributing to my well-being. Psychologically, lots of evidence that mindfulness reduces stress, and stress actually on its own increases inflammation in the body. So it reduces stress and thereby reduces inflammation, improves mood and anxiety symptoms, reduces rumination, so that sort of going over and over the thinking, and it improves the quality of relationships because we can slow down and hear what the other person is needing and tell others what we need in a much more measured way. So the next slide, please. The other way that sort of the one other place that is really quite interesting for aging and mindfulness is the growing understanding of the effect of mindfulness on thinking. And although the research is in its infancy, one thing we are really learning is that no matter what age you are, the brain is always regenerating itself. So it's always creating new pathways, creating new modes of communication. And years ago, we didn't think that was the case. So we can use mindfulness to create new patterns of healthier thinking that actually then allow the brain to function at its most optimal. So, so neuroplasticity is our friend as we get older. So mindfulness strengthens the prefrontal cortex. So that is our executive functions, our problem solving, our assessment skills, our appreciation, our planning, you know, our empathy. Those things are in the prefrontal cortex, and long-term meditators are shown to have much more gray matter in their prefrontal cortices. Also, mindfulness meditation dampens down the warning bell in the brain, the amygdala, which triggers off that fight or flight response in the body. And so mindfulness meditation helps us to be less emotionally reactive and more emotionally regulated. And that's certainly a consistent finding. It also reduces the mind wandering when we don't want it to. So it deactivates what's called our default mode network. So it increases our cognitive reserve, like so as I go into my later years, I really want to have the most robust well-being in my brain that I can. And mindfulness is one of those things that can help you with mental efficiency and control, mental flexibility. And you remember you need that for resilience. And it helps with integrating the brain's functioning as a whole. And the brain loves to be integrated, all the parts communicating well. Mindfulness helps with that. There's lots more to say about that, but those are some of the high points. So just to say, one of the things that we struggle with, almost all of us as we age, is our attention. And mindfulness meditation is a task of attention training. It's like going to the gym for your brain. And also to say that lots of those areas of the brain are strengthened when we do regular exercise and when we eat well as well. All right, next slide, and we're almost finished. We'll have time for some questions. What isn't mindfulness? This is how we feel lots of times when we're practicing meditation. We feel like we have a monkey in our mind because the mind is just thinking and thinking and thinking. This cartoon, you know, this fellow had some neurosurgery. He says, yes, we found this in your brain. So that would be monkey mind. Wouldn't that be nice if I could let go of the busyness of my mind? Meditation helps me to do that. But meditation isn't, and mindfulness meditation isn't, a relaxation technique. Oftentimes we do feel more relaxed when we practice mindfulness, but that's not its primary purpose. Remember, it's about being with whatever arises and being willing to be with whatever arises and attending and paying attention to what arises with openness and curiosity. Sometimes relaxation comes with that, but a lot of times we start busy, we end busy. And sometimes people feel like, oh, I'm not doing this very well. Nope, not the case. That's just the way the mind is. We're gradually training it. It's not about running away from problems. It's actually running towards our emotions, running towards our top 10 most problematic thoughts so that we can actually start to recognize what's going on and work with them differently. It's not a religion, although mindfulness meditation is borrowed very much from Buddhist psychology, at least the mindfulness meditation that's now integrated into secular teachings in healthcare, etc. But you can practice any faith and still connect in with these practices. It's not about emptying the mind. I was saying it's not a panacea for everything that's challenging. And it's not a scientific slam dunk. It's not like, wow, all the research is, saying that it's the best thing next to sliced bread. But boy, is that research base growing. So just to end our formal part of the presentation on where to begin. So if we could go to the next slide. First off, I encourage everybody to start small. So how about having a few mindful sips of a drink each day, or committing to 3 mindful bites of each meal? That alone could be quite transformational. Maybe begin to practice the stop practice every day and check in with yourself, maybe 3 times a day. Just check in. Okay, stop, take a big breath. What am I noticing? Physical sensations, thoughts, emotions. So what is that telling me about where I need to head in my next moment, in the next moments of my day? To approach it with the least amount of suffering and the most enjoyment possible. So practice the stop every day. And if you practice that enough, you'll be able to pull it out when things are difficult. And actually it will give you a lot of resilience for whatever's going on. Download an app. Most do have free entry practices. Insight Timer is one of the best in terms of having many free practices and a timer built into it. Headspace, very commonly used. 10% Happier. And again, I don't get commission from any of these places, and if you do sort of pay for the app, they're not inexpensive, but they often offer free courses or free podcasts. So 10% Happier has a wonderful podcast that's a great place to start. Look for an introductory mindfulness class. So maybe something called one of the courses that people attend offers mindfulness-based stress reduction. If you're dealing with a lot of stress, chronic illness, if you are struggling with just to manage everything that's going on, mindfulness-based stress reduction is probably the gold standard course. There's a course called MAPS, Mindful Awareness Practices for Daily Living. That's a wonderful introduction to mindfulness. Or in BC, you can go to the BC Insight Meditation Society, and that is associated. That's a Buddhist site, but from the Western Buddhist perspective, wonderful offerings there as well. So I'm going to stop there, and just to say that I certainly can, an N of 1, but speak from my own experience of how. Mindfulness practice and learning to work with my mind effectively using mindfulness made such a difference throughout the 11 years of caregiving and supporting my mom and dad. And I'm very grateful that I was able to do that. And it was, I'm sure, in no small part because of my practice. I think I'm growing definitely wiser and definitely more resilient and all those sort of factors, more perseverant, more compassionate. Yeah, it's been a game changer for me. So happy to answer whatever questions you have. And I really appreciate the fact you've hung in with us, and I hope the session was helpful.
Liz, I'm just going to jump in and say thanks so much, Dr. Drance. You made everything so approachable and possible. I think that was really wonderful, and I'm grateful. So please put your questions in the box. We have a little time left for questions.
All right, we have first question up. Many thanks for the excellent presentation. How do you think that mindfulness could be integrated into institutions that provide care to older adults?
Great question, thank you. So I think that it could be integrated in 3 different ways, possibly 4, 3. So I think that we can, there are places that have integrated mindfulness into activities that happen every morning. They might be at the breakfast table before we start our meal, or it might be afterwards. But just taking a few slow, deep breaths, actually teaching people who live in care to do a stop practice and just guiding them through those practices, or using some mindful games for all kinds of ways of relating to mindfulness in lighter sort of, not, you don't have to sit and be still for 10 minutes, although many people do enjoy that 10-minute guided practice of people living in care. Second, if you did that, you could also invite staff and residents, something they can do together by putting a mindfulness meditation on for 5 minutes. You end up with better regulated staff and better regulated residents. So everybody's kind of enjoying learning together, and actually then it sort of bleeds isn't a good, but it sort of seeps into the rest of the day. And there's nothing better than a present care staff, no matter who we are, right? Doctor, nurse, care aide, laundry person. You know, if I can be present, I can read what the needs are much, much better. And then the third way is to actually do some training with staff, with families, actually, was with the third way I was thinking, is that families who, especially right now with COVID, it has been a nightmare of a time for them, and understandably, you know, overwhelmingly anxiety provoking, stressful, and to be able to have a skill that you can call on and kind of work with in the midst of all of this chaos, it can be incredibly helpful. So there's another one, and that's the one that where we actually need to get government, all the members of all our MLAs practicing mindfulness as well, so that they're actually making wise decisions on policy. So we'll have to add that to the ARC report, I think.
We have a question from Helen. Helen, you should
Hi,
be unmuted.
Yeah. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Helen. I'm the outreach coordinator at the District of West Vancouver, and I've so much enjoyed your presentation, Elizabeth. As a woman living with cancer, I have to say that a lot of the time I don't live in the present. I live in fear of the future and what have I done wrong to create this. But I also am blessed to work with people living with dementia, and it is my passion to make life better for them and their caregivers. So I am wondering, have you used the mindfulness with those living with dementia?
So I have, you know, this I just love this, because it's like, Liz, you need to get on this, because I have not worked with people with cognitive change using mindfulness, but it's my dream, you know, next phase is to actually identifying people, you know, who are perhaps in fact living with minimal cognitive impairment to start with, and seeing if we work with families like partners, dyads, you know, wives and husbands, or children and parents, and teaching them together as a skill they can take with them on the whole dementia, you know, journey, is something that is interesting. But also there is increasing research about doing mindfulness with people who are living with cognitive impairment. But I think I just think it's such a beautiful thing to share, you know, in terms of dyads and walking along the road together, because, you know, as long as we live, we breathe, right? And as long as we live, we might be able to follow, like, let's take a few deep breaths together, and that's a lot of co-regulation that's really healthy.
Thank you very much, Liz, and I would love to invite you, when COVID is a little bit safer, to come and visit us here at the District of West Vancouver and see the programs we do with keeping connected and those living with dementia.
And I know the wonderful work you're doing, because I hear about it all the time. So I don't know because I haven't seen it, but I just to say, way to go, West Van. Amazing.
Thank you very much.
Going to go to Tissa. So Tissa is providing us with a link from the Birken Buddhist Monastery with information on mindfulness. And Val, yes, we will share the links as well. Leanne asks a question, is there a benefit to longer out breath than in breath?
Great question. So, you know, I think again, there are many ways up the mountain, but what we do know is that that when we breathe out, we are relaxing the body, and there is more connection with the parasympathetic nervous system. So the longer out breath allows more relaxation to happen and more letting go, which can be profoundly helpful for us. So yeah, I would say there is, you know, that's some teachings suggest breathe out more slowly than breathing in, and that will help with the relaxation response.
Thank you. And there's also a question about specific research into use of meditation with individuals with cognitive impairment.
Right. So I'll send the studies that I'm aware of, you know, so that they can be put on a site or the links sent out. It's not robust yet, and that's why I say the you know, the science is quite new, but I do think there is science, there is some evidence both for people living with cognitive change and for their families. More, actually, interestingly, more on how it affects families positively.
Thank you. I think that's it for our questions for the moment. We're seeing lots of thanks and positive remarks coming up in the chat. And I'm aware that we're just after 3 o'clock here, and maybe we'll turn it back to Barb, and I believe Mary Lou has a few words.
Well, Liz, thank you so much. That you can see how much interest there is in what you're talking about, and you've already given us a few ideas about what we can do next. And we're all so grateful. So speaking on behalf of everyone, and everyone, thank you all for coming. I know we have a great number of people in our audience today, and we're really thrilled. Please come back next time, and I'm going to turn it over to Mary Lou in a second, she'll give you the information about the next time. But from the Alzheimer's Society of BC, a huge thank you to the Providence, to Mary Lou and to Christine for all the work that you've done. And Kim, it worked out. Thanks so much, everybody.
Yeah. And Jenny, and who is our other interpreter?
Jenny and Julie. Yes, thank you so much.
Great.
Jenny and Julie. Yes, thank you, Liz.
Thank you very much. So just to end this really engaging couple of hours that we had, and to thank again Liz and Penny, I want to just give you the date of our next session coming up in February 25th, and a couple more quite different but engaging topics, and that we're going to look at the relevance of art and music when it comes to aging well, and include some aspects of dementia and creativity as well. So do join us then, and we'll be sending out a link with the details. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.